Hey, my name's Dustin Myers. I'm the strength coach. I own a gym out in Granville, Ohio. Worked with a lot of wrestlers over the years. Was the strength coach for the Ohio RTC. Technically, still am the strength coach for the Ohio RTC. Served as the primary strength coach for the Buckeyes from about 2012 up to 2018, and was still down there till COVID. And so kind of working on kind of loose basis, even now when you have recruits come in and stuff like that. So. You guys are all high school coaches here, right? So last year was my first year. I'd helped out before. It was my first year as a full-time youth coach, running the youth coach in my program in my town. And I've never been so stressed in my life. So I don't know how you guys do it. I got more stressed over like my sons in our team's youth duels than I ever did for the Big Tens or for the national tournament or anything. So anyway. You guys got a stressful time coming up. So hopefully I can share some stuff with you guys today that'll make things a little bit easier, because if you have a good structure in place for your strength conditioning, it can help kind of hide maybe some deficiencies for your athletes, kind of help prevent injury and help make sure they're able to compete harder. Now I know it'd be great if I had a fancy PowerPoint presentation for you and stuff today, but I woke up, kind of scribbled some bullet points. I thought, all right, check with Jared, make sure I got a whiteboard to write on. I'm gonna diagram some stuff out and try to get you guys to really get a good handle on how we can transition to in-season strength conditioning, okay? Now, as I'm going over this stuff, if a question kind of pops into your head that's really relevant to what I'm talking about, then just raise your hand. We'll take some time for questions at the end, but I think sometimes there's gonna be a lot of information over the next 30 minutes, so I might get to the end and maybe I've lost my train of thought, you forgot what the question was, and then it's not gonna be as impactful. So if you have something you need to ask, while I'm in the middle of it, don't be afraid to raise your hand. That kind of gives me more to work off of as well. So, how many of you in this room have not just, hey, we have open lifting work, but have like a program in place for your athletes to use in season?
In season, no out season.
Yeah, good. So like in season, like here in the next couple weeks when you guys start, you have something for the athletes to keep doing. You guys? Okay. All right. And probably in most cases, is it like an assistant coach running it? Do you have a dedicated strength guy, or like Mark, who runs your strength stuff here?
Me or assistant.
Okay. So I think, usually what I encounter with most, high-level wrestling coaches, guys that have coached forever, they've wrestled high levels and stuff, they've done the strength training themselves, but things, just like wrestling, the sport of wrestling evolves so much. When I was in high school, like leg passes and scrambling wasn't a thing like it is now. The sport looked completely different. It's the same thing with strength conditioning. The stuff that I did in high school, I don't really do anymore. Even the stuff that I did when I first started down at the RTC, like the workouts I had, Logan Stever doing, his sophomore, junior year, I wouldn't use those same workouts now with my athletes. That's not to say they weren't good, but it's just, things evolve. So I think most of the time what I run into with high school coaches when you guys are running your strength programs is that all the pieces. Okay, all right, we need to do squats or squat variations. We need to do rope climbs. We need to do pull-ups. You know all these things. We need to run. We need to bike. But there's always a deeper understanding that you can develop of how the things need to fit together and how different variables can affect what you should be doing and how it's going to be beneficial. So it's not just a matter of saying, hey, we need to do rope climbs. It's, hey, when do we do rope climbs? Why are we doing the rope climbs? How do we do them? Those type of things, all right? So when I think of in-season strength conditioning, the workout's going to really kind of fall into two categories. And the first category, we're actually going to loop two different things here together. So power, so explosive power, speed, trying to get the athlete more explosive. And also absolute strength. Now, even though those are kind of two different things, I'm going to group them together just because the variables for those are going to be very similar. All right, so that's going to be kind of one type of lift you're going to do. The other type is going to be, kind of, we'll call it strength endurance or work capacity. Kind of a generic term, but endurance, cardio, whatever you want to look at it. Strength endurance, the localized muscle endurance, that type of thing, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that when you do a workout that's focused on power, that there's not going to be some type of element of strength and that you might not have some type of work capacity stuff mixed in or at the end there. No, you can still do that. And that doesn't mean that when you do work capacity stuff, there might you know, there can still be a power and a speed element to it as well. But typically, you're gonna wanna have a primary focus for that workout. You know, just like I'm sure when you guys kind of plan out your practice schedule for the week, it's like, okay, this day we're gonna wrestle matches, it's gonna be heater, another day is gonna be more of a spar, a technique day, this other day, you know, we're gonna do whatever. So you gotta kind of think of your strength training in those same type of terms. You can say like, all right, even though we have all these different pieces and all these different goals we want to accomplish, what's the primary goal that we want to look at? And so like I said, those are gonna, in season, now out of season, we spread it out a little bit differently, but in season, I have my guys lift twice a week, one that's power and strength based, and one that's more work capacity, okay? Now, when we look at these two different lifts, you gotta look at a lot more than just what the exercises are, okay? And the example I like to give is box jumps. So box jumps are a great tool that we use to develop power. And the way that we do that, and I'll get into some more details by the way we program it, to build explosive power. What I see a lot of coaches do is they end up using box jumps over here for work capacity. Because anytime I ask a coach, I say, you know, I say, hey, you got plyo boxing? Oh yeah, we do box jumps all the time. Okay, what do you use the box jumps for? Oh, you know, I gotta get my wrestlers explosive. I said, okay, how do you do the box jumps? Oh, after practice, I'll have them, 2 minutes on the box jumps, and I have the other guys, run sprints for 2. I'm like, okay, you took a power modality and you're using it for work capacity. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you just know, like, hey, the box jumps aren't making them more explosive today, but we're working on their endurance, okay? So that's what you got to think in terms of, not just the exercises themselves. So variables we'll look at. The timing and length. So first thing, timing wise, so I mean like time of the day, time of the week. If you want your wrestlers to improve their power, if you want them to improve their strength, or at a minimum maintain their strength, because I do say it is very hard to build additional strength in season. I know that's something, there's different trains of thought, and I've argued with those strength coaches about, because they're going to say, oh, progressive overload, you can still get stronger in season. I'm saying, well, they're making weight every week, they get this many hours on the mat, their volume's really high. It's really, really tough to improve absolute strength when you're in season. But we want to, at the very, very minimum, not lose our strength, right? So timing-wise, this workout right here cannot be after practice. You can't say, all right, we finished up our practice, now we're gonna head to the weight room and we're gonna deadlift, and we're going to do heavy presses and our heavy one-arm rows and stuff. You can do it, but in that fatigued state, all you're doing is really breaking them down further. Okay, so timing-wise, this workout's very important. So this needs to be either an off day or prior to practice. Now I know most people don't really like to have a lift before practice, but let's say when you look at the timing of it, you know that, hey, Wednesdays is just light drilling and technique. They're not gonna be taxed super hard from an energy standpoint. Then that's the day you go to the weight room first and you get your heavy lift in. You do your power movements, and you do your heavy absolute strength stuff on that day. I have my high school kids, because I don't control their club schedule and their school practice schedule, I have them come in on Sundays. So starting at the end of next week or whatever, when the season starts, up until the state tournament, or I guess really the week before the state tournament, my guys are in there every Sunday, and that's their heavy lift. Now in an ideal world, you would want them to have maybe the day off for recovery, because they probably wrestle on Saturday. But the way I look at it is they wrestle tournament on Saturday, they go out to Texas Roadhouse, they put on a bunch of bloat, their body's gonna feel good, they probably sleep in on Sunday. I have them come in at 10 o'clock. That's when we get our main lift of the weekend, okay? The other thing is, lengthwise, this workout is gonna be long. So this can be anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. Obviously, you wouldn't do 2 hours during the week before a practice, but when I have them in there on Sundays, it's usually from 10 to 12. We take our time. I don't want to see a lot of fatigue. I want to, them to have plenty of rest in between their sets. I want them to feel good and be able to lift heavy. And they should leave there, feeling good, and not just like they were ground into the dirt. And I don't put any extra conditioning on them that day. All right. For the strength, endurance, and work capacity stuff, this can be after practice. And so like with my actual lifts, when we do a lift like that, we do that on Tuesday, and typically my guys will come there after high school practice, and some of them even come there, high school practice, then my lift, and then club practice after that. In my mind, it's probably a little bit too much, but I mean, that's not up to me, that's up to all the other crazy dads who want their kid to practice all night. So this is fine to do in a fatigue state, okay? Because we're not really worried with absolute strength. You know, if we're doing med ball slams here, I don't care whether they're using a 50-pound med ball or if they're tired that day, they can use a 30-pound med ball. The key is the intent has to still be there to move the ball fast, okay? But I'm not really so much worried about how much weight they're throwing around here, okay? This can be after practice. I wouldn't want to necessarily do it before practice unless you don't care that they're already tired when they get on the mat. So again, if it's just a drilling or spar day, that'd be fine. And these are also good for to have these little mini workouts in the room when the practice is over. Hey, you take 15 minutes, they're climbing ropes, they're pushing sleds, doing med ball, doing stance motion, that type of thing. Those type of workouts that are very short, those would kind of fall in there as well. Also too, you can tack some of that stuff on to the end of their heavy lift. If there's no other time you can do it, you just can't do it before the heavy lifting. And I just don't like to do it on Sundays because I like kind of having one day where their heart rate's not through the roof, essentially. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Sometimes I can't tell whether you're messing with your hair or you're raising your hand. I know Jared's not messing with his hair. Okay. The next thing we would want to look at is our rep range. Ideally, for power and strength, I keep everything, not just in season, but year round, on our main lifts, everything between 1 to 5. My guys are never doing sets of 10 on front squat. They're never doing 10 on deadlift. You're never doing 10 on bench press. I mean, unless it's like a deload week or somewhere. I just wanted to get some pump work in or whatever. And same thing with, I talked about box jumps earlier. When we're doing power work, whether it's weighted jumps or just bodyweight jumps on the boxes or different type of plyos, 1 to 5, crisp reps, because you just get kind of diminishing returns. If we're doing 10 high box jumps right in a row, boom, 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 we're getting diminishing returns. All right, and we don't want fatigue to really be a huge factor on this stuff. So we keep the rep range really low right there. For this stuff, it can be high, or it can be lower, but compounded. So a good workout that I used to use with the Buckeyes a lot, we had the medicine balls up to 200 pounds in the room. Sometimes they would have me come in to do a lift like that after practice, and we would have the pull-up bars. So I would have the athletes in like groups of 4, spread out on all the pull-up bars. Everyone would have like 2 heavy med balls. You start with 1 med ball. You maybe can't remember what else to make this up. It's 5 slams, 5 suplexes, 5 bodylock squats, 5 lunges, and then 10 pull-ups. And then you drop back down. So there we're still using sets of 5, but we're compounding a bunch of movements together. And so we're using those kind of quote unquote strength and power movements as more of a conditioning modality. The other thing to think about too, a lot of the stuff that you're going to use here isn't going to necessarily be reps. It could be time. It can be sled pushes for time or for distance. It can be aerodyne sprints are going to be mixed in. So it's not always going to be rep range, but in general, higher or lower reps that are compounded together with either similar or more contrasting movements. Okay. Kind of piggybacking on that is the volume. The volume is going to be, kind of the overall workload, the total amount of sets that they're going to do. All right. Here, our power and strength work, our volume is going to be relatively low. Okay. Now, out of season, let's say, and I'll use deadlift as examples. Deadlift is one of my favorite exercises. So when I have guys doing heavy deadlifts in the summer, it might be programmed for 5 sets of 2, but they might spend 4 or 5 sets warming up, and then they have kind of 2 heavy sets of 5, and then 2 more like heavier sets of 5, and then that 5th set maybe they're going for like their max double. Okay, so they're doing a ton of sets, and it's going to be a lot of sets that are going to be close to their 1 rep max, or close to whatever their 2 rep max is. If I were to program 5 doubles on deadlift here, in season, they're really only going to have 1 set that is going to be really taxing to them. So whether that's the 4th or the 5th set, the other sets are going to be kind of light and warm up, and they just gradually build up to it. So the overall intensity is lower, the volume is lower, they're not getting as many sets, and not to get off track here, but something you want to watch in season is, let's say I get to that 4th double on deadlift, and it looks heavy, the first rep looks good, the second rep looks slow, it looks like they're starting to break position. Don't be afraid to shut them down. They don't have to do that 5th set. Now off season, I might say, hey, just back the weight back down. Let's go down from 365 to 335, let's hit another double. I look at it in season, like once you kind of check that box, like okay, they reached kind of their ceiling for that day, strength-wise. It's okay now to just change gears and move on to the next area that we're working on. Out of season, their body can take a little bit more load, a little bit more volume, but in season, we want to make sure you cut it off in an appropriate time. So volume here is really low. Volume here is going to be high from the standpoint of high reps, lots of the movement patterns going to be repeated over and over and over again. But in general, just the I think a way to say it, the duration is going to be low. Meaning, if we're doing sled pushes, in some type of circuit, we might hit 2 or 3 rounds until their legs are pretty fatigued, but we're not going to do 10 rounds to where they're crawling out of there and puking, because you still have to kind of look at it within the context of what's the practice plan this week. We have a duel on Thursday. We have a tournament on the weekend or whatever. We got to make sure, and this got to be the biggest, one of the biggest things to think about, is that what you're doing in the weight room has to complement the wrestling. It can't take away from it. And if you don't feel like you have a good handle on that, don't feel bad. It took me probably my first 2 or 3 years down at Ohio State to really get a handle on that. I went down there with like this chip on my shoulder, like I gotta just bury these guys every day and just crush them. And then it got to be the point where I remember Reese telling me one day, because Reese Humphrey was still down there at the RTC, so he was training with the guys every day. He was like, dude, the workout on Wednesday was awesome. He's like, but no one could walk at practice that day at 2 o'clock, And so I kind of had to take my ego out of it and say, all right, I gotta remember, even though this is my Super Bowl every day, going down there and training these guys, it's actually the least important part of their day. It's still an important part, but their nutrition, their recovery, and the wrestling that they're doing that day at 2:30 because they got live matches, that's the most important thing. And what I'm doing has to complement that. Okay? So the conditioning work, these strength endurance, work capacity stuff, especially if you're doing it after practice, they're already worn out, but you want to get some strength work in, and you want to really push them a little bit. Whether it's 10, 15, 20 minutes, hit them with something hard and then let them get out of there. Don't completely bury them, or you'll notice that fatigue's going to carry over to the next day. Now, there can be different ways to look at it. Maybe this time of year, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can train through certain things early in the season. But as you get, especially as you get later in the season, they've made weight X amount of times. Their bodies beat up a little bit. Just that we're all familiar with the fatigue of the season. So, especially once it gets later on, say, you know what, I want to work them, but I need to make sure that they feel good when they walk out of here. Okay. Along those same lines, intensity. So, when we think of intensity for our power and strength work, we want it to be high from the standpoint of load and effort. Meaning we want the weights to be heavy, and we want the intent to be there, to move heavy weight and also to move weight fast. So I really put an emphasis on bar speed and moving the weight with the intention to move it fast. And I always tell my guys, because you can't always have everything set up perfectly when you have 20 or 30 kids all training at once. You might only have so many plyo boxes. And because of the way it's set up, maybe a guy that can jump high is on the box is only 24 inches. Well, if he's only jumping 25 inches to get on that 24-inch box, but really he could jump onto a 48-inch box, he's not getting anything out of it. So I tell him, hey, the intention has to be there to jump as high as you can. You're just landing on the box however high it is. So that's one of the things. You got to make sure the load is high on these days, the intention and the effort is equally high. Super important. Because if not, the stimulus to improve is not going to be there. You know, then we're just kind of going through the motions. If we're just doing, especially when these rep ranges are low, you know, if you're doing sets of 3, but you're either A, not doing your heaviest possible triple, or, because sometimes you don't want them always doing as heavy as possible in that triple, if they're not moving it with the intention of moving it fast and powerfully, then that stimulus is not going to be there to get them to improve. Okay? The intensity here, you want it to be high on your work capacity days, but from a, well, I don't want to just say again, from a work capacity standpoint, but you think you want your heart rate to be high, you want the pace to be high, okay? So there the intention is obviously to work hard, okay? You know, if someone's on an airdyne sprint and they are, you know, they're going faster, but they're not doing it as fast as they can. Like those are the type of things you have to pick up on as a coach, you know, with the coach's eye to be able to see like, okay, we're doing the circuit, everyone's on everything for a minute at a time or whatever as we cycle through it. Are they actually giving everything they can into that minute, or are they just putting in a minute worth of work? And it's a really important distinction. And I'm sure that you have some wrestlers that understand that distinction probably just intuitively, they know how to do that. And you know, some that don't. I mean, you probably see it in drilling as well. An example I'll give you, just because I was talking to someone about this the other day. My son goes to the Crazy Good, so Ross Thatcher's room. And I get to see some of the older kids in there too. I love watching Michael Boyle drill. You guys all know who Boyle is, right? Because it doesn't matter whether he has a really good kid or he has a kid that's his size, it looks terrible. He drills so hard, he's exhausted every time Ross brings him back to the center. And so I told my son one time, I said, hey, do you see how much better Boyle is than that kid he's drilling with? He said, yeah. I said, do you see how exhausted he's getting himself? I said, that other kid is not getting himself exhausted. He's doing that to himself. And he's doing it every single time. That's part of why he's so good. So, not to get sidetracked, but the same thing when you do this work capacity stuff. There has to be, whether it's already innate in the athlete or something that you can instill in them, they have to have that desire to want to exhaust themselves. You know, if they're climbing a rope, they have to try to climb it as fast as they can, versus and just barely creeping up to the top. Okay, you have to kind of get them to let go of that fear of emptying their gas tank. So, power and strength, we want the intensity to be high from a load and effort standpoint. Work capacity stuff, high from a, you know, when you think of like your heart rate, your pace, and I'm going to put intent, just I really like that. All right, and one more I'm going to go over. Anyone have any questions about that stuff so far?
How many days would you do that high intensity workout? 2 days a week, maybe? And like
once or twice.
We're still like pre-season, like right now. Right?
Yeah, right now I think twice is fine. I would just think like on a week, if you're competing multiple times, once is probably good. And if it's a week where you're really heavy in competition, it's okay to let this one drop off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, let's say you got a duel, you got a big 2-day tournament coming up, they're just coming off another tournament, this one can drop off. This is the one we never drop off though. But I think right now, this time of year, you know, maybe this is twice, plus maybe have another day where you're running hills or something, like it might, you know, kind of fall into that category. But minimum one.
This one I think gets lost more
This
in
one?
season.
For sure.
Just because of the time.
Yep.
And, you know, everybody wants to continue drilling, we gotta make weight, we gotta, you know, get the kids in shape, you know, and then you're like, where do we go? You know, like you said, Sunday, but.
Well, I know it's hard for high school. I mean, I'm obviously a private practice, so
Right.
that's a work day for
Bring
me.
it in, you know, try to bring in kids Sunday, and
Right.
you know, we're gonna get the right kids to come in. We're gonna get, you know, the 30th kid on the team. You know, it's,
Yep.
you know,
Hey, you can send them all to me.
yeah.
You know, let's get them signed up. But no, I know that it definitely is a challenge for high school. So probably the more ideal thing is to do it during the week and do like to say, hey, like our practice that day is going to be light after. It's going to be a drilling day or whatever, and our priority that day is going to be the strength versus the wrestling. That way you can make sure you get it in. So whether that's like on a Monday or something early in the week, you know. And that doesn't mean you can't wrestle them hard after. It just, you know, when you do two things back to back like that, one's always going to take away from the other. It's kind of what it is. And what you don't want is you don't want them thinking, oh, I know we got to wrestle hard today, so I'm going to kind of save my energy and not lift this heavy or whatever like that. Because kids will try to they'll try to finagle like that. They're good part.
If you were a wrestling coach and you could set up your schedule perfectly, would you still do that system, or would you manipulate it to do a different system? So say, would you do your one on the left twice if you could, or would you keep doing it back?
Yeah. So I don't think it's necessary in season to do this twice. Now,
Why don't you think it would be necessary?
well, because if you look at the overall volume during the week between school time, school practice, competition, probably most of your better kids go to club, I'm sure. Yeah, so you got to kind of look at at what point does it become too much, Now, where I think this can work if you do it twice a week is if you're having them lift in the mornings. That's something I forgot to cover right here. So again, to use my son as an example, because he's in middle school now this year, where they actually have practice every night and he has club a couple days a week. Him and a partner are going to lift. We're going to do a heavy lift. Some weeks once, but some weeks twice if they don't have competition. In the morning in our basement at 6 a.m.
So you would do it for your twice?
What's that?
You would try to do it twice if you could?
On certain weeks, yes. Yeah. But I think in general, one is sufficient. So there'll be a small handful of weeks where, because we've already kind of started looking at our competition schedule, club schedule, all that stuff, and we started mapping out where we're through January. We have it mapped out every week when we're going to lift. When we, I got it all on a calendar, written in pen. There's a very small handful of weeks where we're going to do 2 lifts in the mornings, and he'll get this stuff in after practice, whether it's a club or at the school, rope climbs and stuff like that. So whether it's his coach making him or I make him stay after and do it. But so out of I'm just gonna guesstimate out of the 8 weeks we have mapped out, there's probably 2 weeks where we're doing this twice. So but yeah, going back to your question about the ideal scenario is probably not Sunday. The ideal scenario is 6 a.m. on Monday. So that way they can actually have a real recovery day on a Sunday. But again, most high school kids, I'm not going to be able to get them to, because most of them drive far to get to my gym anyway. I can get them to come in before school.
I was saying like an ideal situation.
Yeah. Anyone else got any questions before moving on to the next one? Yeah.
We have our girls and guys lift together. The girls don't usually lift as far as the boys. Would you recommend them to doing more endurance stuff while the guys are lifting heavy? Or how do you make it comparable?
Okay, so now the only thing that you have to really take into account when you're thinking about the boys team versus the girls team is a lot of times the girls have less experience in the weight room because they didn't play football or whatever. Now, that can almost be a good thing because most kids don't really learn how to lift properly at football practice or whatever. So, but as far as what they should be doing, the girls need this probably as much or more than the guys do, and that's a common question I get from girls coaches. They'll say, well, what type of workouts should the girls be doing? I'm like, the same one as the boys. They're like, well, shouldn't it be different? I'm like, are they doing different moves out there? Is there different energy and strength demand? No, it's the same thing. The biggest thing though is just kind of really, looking at their relative experience in the weight room. So that you may have to make some adjustments, exercise-wise or whatever. But I would say most of the girls are probably going to need this even more because they're probably behind the 8 ball a little bit strength-wise. But also too, that also means, I know I said earlier you can't get stronger in season. If a girl has just been an athlete and has never actually lifted weights before, she probably will actually get stronger in season because she's still probably so far away from her ceiling.
Could you just kind of maybe outline 5 lifts that you would do on that power strength?
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember that question. I'm going to come back to that because there is something I want to do with that. Because I just realized there's one more thing I have to go here. That's going to tie in for you. And that's exercise selection and modalities. So just on time, I got the assist from Coach over there. Okay. Yeah, I kind of got ahead of myself. I jumped around here. So, how we doing on time, Jared? Okay. So, exercise selection, different modalities that we're going to use. Again, you can take something power-wise, like I talked about box jumps, and you can use it for conditioning. You can take something like, let's say, that we use it in a lot of work capacity circuits, like a rope climb, and you can use it for power or strength work. You know, when we're using it for strength, or power, I'm telling them to climb as fast as they can, that type of thing. So things can cross over, but in general, here we want to look at, I'm going to break it down first into power. So, jumping variations, sled work, med ball work, so slams, throws, suplexes, things like that. Different things that train, and I'm just going to list this here because I know a lot of people are in love with Olympic lifting. Triple extension. You guys know what triple extension means? So triple extension is your ankle, your knee, and your hip. All three joints extending at once. Okay, so it's a really kind of a base of most athletic movements involve some type of triple extension. When we run, when we jump, and that is really what you're trying to train when you do Olympic lifting, like hang cleans, power cleans, stuff like that. Trying to explosively extend all three movements, or all three joints as you get under the bar. I know you guys are all real big, Olympic lifters. People always ask me, like, well, why don't you use cleans? I say, well, cleans are great, but as you know, they're a skill movement. It's its own sport, which your daughter competes in, and you have other kids at Sandusky compete in it. You can still train triple extension by doing other movements and maybe have a lower threshold, lower barrier of entry technique-wise. We can take a med ball and pick it up explosively and slam it, and we're still working that triple extension. Okay, so that's stuff that you want to use for power, the main things. For absolute strength, we need squat movements. And my guys, back squat maybe only in the spring. We don't back squat in the fall or during the season, but we do other variations. Split squats, goblet squats, Zercher squats, things like that. We don't load the spine once we get into the season. Deadlift variations / hinge. So our deadlift variations change as we get into the season. We'll do something advanced. We'll do a lot of kettlebell swings, which isn't a deadlift, but it's still a hinge movement. So working the glutes, the hamstrings, posterior chain. We're going to do presses. So we're in the summer, we do a lot of barbell bench press. As we get into the season, it's mostly dumbbells, and we'll do different unilateral or isolateral presses and things like that. Rows, dumbbell rows, T-bar rows, we love rows. We do a lot of weighted chins too. We don't do as much weighted chins in season. I'll still put pull-ups there. Let's see. Those are kind of our main absolute strength movements. Now we do include some strength accessories and stuff like that. So if it is a day where we're doing a squat movement, we might want to do some work for the hamstrings to really kind of swirl them up. So we may do glute ham raise or like single leg hamstring sliders or things like that. So there will be kind of like smaller movements involved, but for the most part, these are going to be big compound movements. And in the off season, a lot of barbell work. As we get in the season, a lot of dumbbell and kettlebell work. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Can I get my last thing right here? Here we got work capacity. Let's go. Sleds, ropes, med balls, and bikes. Boom. I'll tell you what, it looks like I'm out of time. I'll stick around for a few minutes. If there's anyone that has any specific questions, I'll hang out here in the hall. Appreciate